Hi, and welcome to the WorldTeach Global Leadership Year webinar, Teaching and Living in China. Thank you for bearing with us as we had a little bit of a technical difficulty, and it seemed that attendees could not hear. So thank you very much for letting us know that. And welcome to our webinar today on the Global Leadership Year. You're joining us today so we can discuss the 2018 departure of our China Global Leadership Year program, which departs this upcoming August. Amongst our listeners, we have new applicants, those that have been accepted to the program, and others interested in learning about WorldTeach China. And we also have a distinguished panel made up of two recent WorldTeach China alumni. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Liz Blanco, and I'm the Program Director at WorldTeach. I'd also like to introduce Caitlin Ivester, who is this webinar's co-organizer.
Hi, everyone, and I'd like to echo Liz's thanks for you guys being on the webinar today, and also for your patience as we got the audio started. So I'm the Director of Communications at WorldTeach, and what I'll do next is just go a little bit over the agenda for today's webinar. So we'll spend a few minutes meeting our panelists and learning a bit about their backgrounds. Then we'll get into some of the topics of discussion that you see listed here. This will include orientation, program structure and support, day-to-day life in your placement, immersion strategies, the participant experience in the classroom, and so on. And then at the end, we'll dedicate time to a question and answer session with our panelists. And throughout the webinar, you can submit questions through the chat function that you should see on your screen. We will wait until the end to address them as a group. So for now, let's continue on and have our panelists introduce themselves, and we will start with Tracy. So Tracy, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. This is Tracy Sullivan. I was in WorldTeach with my husband, Matt Sullivan, in the year 2015-2016. I found out about WorldTeach because we had applied together for the Peace Corps, and it was difficult to place us together as a couple in the Peace Corps, so we started looking for Peace Corps alternatives. And so I did an internet search and found a subreddit, and that was how I found out about WorldTeach. Since that time, we have really had the pleasure of living in China and also in several places in Southeast Asia. After we left WorldTeach, we moved to Vietnam. And then we also spent some time in Thailand. And now we're back in the United States, in Arizona, where we both teach online to students who live in China for a company called VIP Kit.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. And Matt, anything you'd like to add on to that?
I'm Matt Sullivan. Prior to WorldTeach, I spent 17 years in corporate America, and we're looking to do something different, and this definitely opened the door and opened the world to not just another different job in America, but you can get a different job anywhere and look any place for different opportunities.
Great, Matt. Thank you. Thank you both for introducing yourselves.
Thanks. And in addition to our alumni panelists, we also have another special guest from our home office in Cambridge. We have the WorldTeach Executive Director, Dr. Mitra Shavarini, on the line with us. We've asked Mitra to join us today to give us a little insight into the importance of being in China, of China on the global scale, and just how that fits into the global experience. So, Mitra, we have one simple question for you. Why China?
Why China? Thank you so much, first of all, Liz, and for all of you who've joined us on this webinar. If you're listening to this webinar, I'm sure you understand how important China is. I have a feeling that you understand that it remains the world's major player, and particularly as the world's growth engine. In fact, from an economic perspective, China is indeed the major contributor to the global GDP. But for much of the recent past, people in the West have focused on either the US, Europe, or Japan, while it's really China which continues to hold the secret advantage in today's weakened global economy. But beyond being the primary engine for the world's GDP growth, let me point out other dimensions to China's importance in today's world. China is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. It's home to 20% of the world's population. It's the world's biggest trading nation. It is pro-globalization and pro-trade. Its soft power, meaning influence, is growing across the globe, and its military power has been growing at an astounding rate. So I'm pointing out these facts to highlight that China's centrality in our 21st century world and how imperative it is for outsiders to understand what is shaping its views and decisions. Understanding China is crucial, if not vital. Your future work in the US and elsewhere significantly depends on understanding how this global superpower functions. The experience will allow you to be an open-minded person, ready to adapt and be flexible, which at the end of the day is what every employer is looking for. China gives you experience about how things work in this part of the world and helps you to become more independent. Those looking to learn about China are interested in mixed opportunities these days, the ability to study and to work, a combination that gives the WorldTeach experience its potency, because that's what we do. We are both learning, service, and work. Our program is all the more worthwhile since work opportunities for foreigners are becoming scarcer in China. So our panelists today are going to discuss WorldTeach China in greater detail for you. I just wanted to start this webinar by pointing out why China is important to our future. It is ever more critical that we have people who can be the bridge to this formidable global superpower. So with that, I'll pass it on to Liz Blanco again.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mitra. So as Mitra described, China is a wonderful area to really understand that global economy where things are starting to happen. And those that are interested in finding out this information on in person very much want to understand what is going on, being there in the thick of it themselves, but also developing themselves to better contextualize their intercultural experiences and just the experiences on the ground there. So what we've done is we've developed the leadership program to be able to be there on the ground, have some tangible benefits for yourself, some career enhancing benefits, but also just some benefit of being able to understand the context more in depth. So on the current slide here, we have some of those tangible benefits. For those that are participating in the program, you will receive your TEFL certification. We have the WorldTeach TEFL certification program, which combines your experience in the classroom along with an online course to be able to gain that TEFL certification. You'll have your monthly stipend, which equates to over $4,000 over the course of your tenure. You have your housing that is provided for you, your travel insurance, the visa processing fees, along with guidance on that visa process that's becoming a little more stringent, if you will, and also access to graduate school scholarships. In addition to those tangible benefits, we have other career-enhancing or professional development benefits is the way I like to think of them. We have 3 professional development trainings that are in person to be able to bring you close to scholars and expert practitioners in their fields. We'll have 2 virtual panels that will be happening that will focus in on education, international affairs, and service. And the Intercultural Development Inventory is an assessment and development plan that helps you understand the intercultural experiences that you're having and also those intercultural experiences that those that are interacting with you are having to be able to better and more effectively work in your environment, not only with your students, but with fellow faculty and also your community members. So those are just a few of the tangible career-enhancing professional development benefits that we put together for this cohort to be able to understand their experiences on the ground. And from there, we're going to go ahead and learn a little bit more about another core component of this. You'll be in the classroom with your students. So more about teaching in China, we have Caitlin.
Thank you, Liz, for going into such great detail regarding the specific benefits of the China program. So as Liz mentions, next we'll tackle the topic of teaching in China. The WorldTeach China Global Leadership Year program begins with an in-country orientation that starts directly upon your arrival to China. So the group will have extensive teacher training sessions each day, focusing on creating lesson plans, assessments, classroom management, teaching English as a foreign language techniques, and then the education system in China specifically. At the end of the orientation, you'll complete a short teaching practicum and receive feedback on your teaching from fellow participants and the field staff. Participants will also receive a curriculum that has been designed specifically for the schools and the students that we teach in China that's in line with what the Ministry of Education is currently teaching there. Each participant will also have access to a teacher quality support program in the U.S. office, and you can contact them for help with lesson plans, assessments, provide additional materials and teaching resources through the office, and so on. And then during orientation, and this is another crucial part, participants will also have daily Chinese language immersion classes. The majority of the participants don't know the language before arriving to the country, so if you feel that you don't know much Chinese, then you're in good company. So we will now have some questions for Tracy and Matt about their time during orientation and then their time throughout the year spent teaching in the classroom. So Tracy and Matt, feel free to jump in, whoever is more eager to answer the question. But our first question would be, is there anything that you think participants should bring or prepare for beforehand? Maybe something that either served you really well or something you didn't expect you would have wanted to bring?
Wow. Let's see. There wasn't anything that I really regretted not bringing necessarily. I think that overall, we were pretty well prepared based on the information that we received from the volunteer that was there before us, and then from the different webinars and trainings and things that we had beforehand. I think that yeah, for me, there wasn't anything that I regretted not bringing or anything that I wished that I had brought or anything that I felt that would have prepared me better for the culture shock. I'm not sure about Matt.
If you don't know how to use chopsticks, that might be something to do, because otherwise it's a bad 3 days of eating. That was my problem. So you might want to learn a little bit before that, would be my recommendation.
So, Matt, you wish you had a refresher course beforehand. Did you go hungry?
Oh, I had none.
He was very hungry for about 3 days.
Oh, no. Oh, that's rough. Well, 3 days seems like a pretty good learning curve. So.
I was hungry and motivated.
That's the ultimate motivation. Well, actually, Matt, that leads well into our next question for you, which is, what sort of cultural challenges did either of you or both of you encounter in the classroom? So, Matt, we can start with you.
The classroom, I didn't really understand culturally. Also, my students when they lacked resources, they wouldn't tell me because it was like a shame thing. So I had some problems getting them to turn things in, and it took a long time for me to figure out that they just didn't have paper, and I needed to get paper from the school to have them turn the stuff in, and things like that that aren't obvious, that take a lot, take some patience to figure out.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And, yeah, it's definitely not obvious. I wouldn't have thought of that immediately. What about you, Tracy? Any cultural challenges that stood out to you in the classroom?
I think that the main thing is that it really is based on where you're placed. So Matt and I were in a rural placement, and they did not have a lot of money for things like paper and eyeglasses and things like that. So that was a hurdle that we had to overcome that we didn't expect. I think the next biggest thing with me was just based on the fact that we were very rural. And so they don't see any foreigners at all, really, from outside of the country, let alone foreigners who have brown skin. So that was a huge hurdle for me in my classroom. Not, in terms of they were disrespectful or rude or anything like that, but it was just like the shock of seeing me. For probably the first 3 months when I came into the classroom, they would clap. And I would have to, like get them settled down just to, get everything in order. And they also weren't sure, I think, um, what they expect in a foreign teacher is a white person. And so they weren't sure how much respect to give me or how little respect to give me. And so I really had to teach them how to treat me. And so that was something that I had to overcome.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's really just a very in-depth and insightful response. And I actually think it leads well to, when I hear you say that, I think my first thought is, was that difficult to do in a classroom where their native language wasn't English? And I don't believe your native language was Chinese when you arrived either. So what was the level of English of the students and the teachers, and kind of what were some challenges and successes that came along with communication as a result of the level of English that you saw?
So for me, I had younger students. So my students were considered senior 1 students. So that's anywhere from about 14, sometimes to 16. Sometimes I had 1 or 2 17-year-olds. And I had 2 honors classes. My honors students, I would say, had intermediate English for the most part. For my non-honors classes, it was very, very basic. They could say, hello, how are you? And that was almost pretty much it. They were very good with grammar. They understood grammar completely because they take grammar lessons every day. But applying it and actually having a conversation and putting it to use, they had very limited vocabulary. They knew speech sounds very well and could read, but they didn't necessarily understand what they were reading. They just knew the sounds and could put them together properly in order to read along with me. And then as far as the staff, our liaison had relatively good English, but as far as the English teachers, 1 or 2 of the English teachers I would say were intermediate, and then the rest pretty much had 0 English as far as the Chinese English teachers. That was my experience with my level of students.
How about you, Matt?
Mine was similar. I had some junior students, so that's 2 classes of younger students, but they were honors, so they're higher like hers. So the honors students are probably intermediate, and then the rest are fairly basic. The issue is you have some that don't know basic numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and so in the same class, kids you could have a conversation with. So it's a challenge to hit the bottom and the middle and the top in the same lesson.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a challenge in any classroom, but especially with bigger class sizes, I think that would be quite difficult. And so how big were your classes generally?
For me, my largest class started out as 82 students, and it ended up, by the end of like the last 3 months, it was 88 students. And then my smallest class was my 1 honors class was 59 students. So the majority, I would say, averaged about 70 to 75 students. And I had 14 different classes.
Wow. And what were some of the strategies that you guys used in the classroom to handle classes of that size?
A lot of walking around the classroom just to one of the things that I had to understand, which really frustrated me in the beginning, was there was always kind of this little dull murmur. And originally I thought they weren't paying attention. But really what was happening was the higher level students in the class would translate what I was saying for the lower level students in the class. So then I started to kind of use that. I use the students a lot. I use them as kind of my teaching assistants. I use them quite a bit to just help me get things done. For most of the classes, you will have a classroom monitor, and then you'll have another person who helps you with whatever tech you might have in the classroom. So eventually I learned to utilize those students as much as possible to help me get things done. And then the majority of the time, I really just tried to make sure that I was walking around the classroom to see who needed help, to see who wasn't participating, to see who seemed lost, to see, you know, who was doing very well and could possibly help me help everyone else understand. So I have very limited Chinese, so I could not always translate for them or things like that.
That's great, Tracy. I think all of those strategies must have been really beneficial. And Matt, not to put you on the spot because Tracy just said quite a few strategies, but are there any others in addition that you would add on to that?
I think she did is similar. I try to use at least always have some kind of a video and then some kind of music and choral, so the students that have nothing they have things to do. They have things they can participate in that they can succeed at. And then similar to her strategies, I tried to use my classroom monitor, and then I could have turned my individual students that were good at English into my leads, and then had them help me with the rest of the class, which is similar to actually to how and some of that I got from, I was allowed to observe one of the Chinese teachers, and I noticed that they have the students help them run the class. So I got that from them too.
That's wonderful. You're reminding me of my own time spent teaching abroad, and one of the most helpful things that I did was observe teachers from that particular area of the country and see how they managed the class, and then took some of their ideas. I found that to be very helpful. Great. Well, thank you, Tracy and Matt, for answering our questions about teaching. And next we'll go on to the topic of living in China, and we'll have Liz take on that one.
Thank you. So we've already talked a little bit about how China's developing, how the participants will develop, what teaching in China is like, and now a very important other aspect of this is living in China. So I'm going to go over just a few key points about the participant life in China. Then I'm going to turn it back to Matt and Tracy. They were on the ground and they can give really good insight into what their lives were like for that service year. So our placements in the past few years have been in the Hunan province. For this upcoming year, we'll also be adding places in the Zhejiang province. Volunteers in both areas will be placed in teacher apartments, usually near the school grounds, and those are provided by schools. You'll have your basic amenities, furnished bedroom, bath, kitchen, electricity, and a majority of the placements will have internet, and if not directly at the housing, at the school you will have internet. And of course, the monthly stipends, which is approximately, depending on the current exchange rate, about $470 per month. So with that, I would like to open it up to Tracy and Matt. Tracy, if we can start with you, can you tell me a little bit about what your average weekday looked like or your weekend?
For the weekdays, our morning would begin at about 5:45 or 6 a.m., depending on what was going on at the school. We weren't really required to teach at that time, but we didn't live near campus, we lived on the campus. So when that trumpet would start, they have a recording of a trumpet for the students to wake them up. We were awake. Eventually, I learned to sleep through it, but in the beginning, it definitely wakes you up. And then they have music that they play as they're going out onto the field to do their morning exercises. So depending on the time of the year, they'll either run or they'll do some type of calisthenics in the morning. And so that takes you until about 7. We lived above the cafeteria. So when they're done with their exercises, they run to the cafeteria to have their breakfast. So that also kept us awake. And then they would start their day as far as their self-study. My particular day, we had different levels of students. So my particular day, my classes would start about 9 a.m. And depending on the day, I would have as few as 3 classes or as many as 6 classes, depending on each day. And so you kind of teach, and then you have a really long break where you can have lunch and have a nap, and then you have some afternoon classes after lunch. And then the rest of the day was pretty much ours to do whatever we wanted to do. In the beginning, I had classes that ended in the afternoon, and I did not have any classes after that time. but Matt did. So for my afternoons, I would just kind of walk around our little city and try to get to know the city and find the different markets and all of the different things that the previous volunteer had told us about in her letter, and just try and get to know the town. Lived at the base of one of the holy mountains in China. And so we spent some time just like getting to know that mountain and just really kind of getting to know as well as we could, getting to know the staff and the faculty. I spent a lot of time in the teacher office for the senior 1 students, just kind of getting to know the teachers. I think I was really fortunate in that when I started with the senior 1s, there were also 2 brand new Chinese English teachers. So we were kind of all getting to know it, getting to know the school and getting to know what was supposed to happen together. And that made me feel a lot more comfortable that we had to learn things together.
Great, thank you. That was a very vivid description. I could feel or hear what it was like to wake up and kind of feel and see around me as you were describing it. Thank you. You had mentioned being around the students often. You're on campus. They're sleeping, in areas around you. Could you tell me a little bit about how that lent itself to your experience of being so intertwined with the students and faculty?
I think it really helped them get to know me. I think one of the things that was different is that they're used to having just 2 individual volunteers at the school where we were. And I think it was probably the first time in a long time, or the first time ever, that they had a married couple. And so that was very interesting to them. They were very interested in coming to visit us and getting to know us and looking around our apartment and looking at all of the things that we had, because we had brought some things from home, as far as decorations and things like that, and asking us questions about, our lives. And they would, as they got to know us more and more, we really kind of became more than just teachers for a lot of them, because there are also senior 3 students on the campus. And those students are not necessarily in the classroom. They're practicing for, there's a big test that they take called the Gaokao that they have to take to determine what university they'll be able to go to. And so we got to know those students as well, because anytime they had a free moment, a lot of them would come and knock on the door and introduce themselves. And so we kind of became more like counselors, because they don't have a lot of counseling available to them. And so they would come to us a lot for advice and for tutoring and different things like that. So we really got a chance to get to know them. They would bring us food. So a few times we would, take them out to lunch and different things like that.
Wow, being able to have that exchange of formal and informal learning sounds like a really rewarding experience.
It was.
Thank you. And Matt, I will direct the next question at you. We had talked a little bit about how you have some time off. Can you tell me how you got involved in the community, or any suggestions you may have to get involved?
I think there's a lot of it is just if somebody asks you to do something, even if you don't want to do it, just say yes. You end up doing ridiculous things, like we did a TV commercial where we fake ate vegetarian food, and you end up doing all kinds of things that even if you don't want to, if you just do it, usually it turns out good. But if you simple thing like we just ate in the teacher cafeteria, and most of the teachers, they didn't speak English, but it felt like we were part of the school because we ate with them and interacted with them, and things like that. Just shop at the same places with the same people. You get to know them, and they get to know you, and you become part of your area.
Great, thank you. And I didn't realize that we had stars on our hands with the commercial. Let's see if we can get a
it was so bizarre. We ate the food, but then we had to pretend that we understood what the host was saying, because he spoke no English at all whatsoever. And at the time, we spoke 0 Chinese. So we just spent a lot of time just like nodding and agreeing with whatever it was he was saying. It was pretty cool.
Sounds fantastic and surreal.
Very.
So that lends itself a little bit to another question that I have. What was your typical diet, or what was your favorite food while you were placed
there? We ate in the canteen quite a bit. There were a few restaurants that were nearby that we would go. We ate mostly local. We had a couple of fast food restaurants where you could get like fried chicken and that type of thing. So sometimes if we just wanted something that seemed like home, we would go to one of the chicken restaurants and get some chicken or a burger. But mostly we ate whatever was available to us, which was, a lot of vegetables, more rice than any human being could possibly eat. And my favorite food, definitely, I think mine was definitely, they make this eggplant dish with potatoes and green beans. That's just really, really, really delicious.
Great. And Matt, did you have a similar experience with your favorite food there?
I ended up really liking I liked the eggplant. It was very, very good. I also liked the tomato and egg. The tomato and egg I really got to like, and then 75 different kinds of noodles. So however you want it, in the glass noodle or different, and flavoring them, it was always interesting to see, like there'd be different random things that I didn't know what they were to spice it with. So I'd put different things on it to see how it tasted. It was kind of fun that way.
And the last question that I have, and Matt, I'll start with you on this one. Can you tell me what was one of the most surprising things about your experience of living and serving in China?
I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect it to just be so huge and so modern, and so many bridges and so many giant buildings and so many people. I'm not sure what I thought it was, but it's so much more and so much more impressive than I ever would have thought before I left, before I came there. It's just so much to see, and so many, every place you turn around, there's 6 high-rises going up and a road and a new thing, and it's just amazing.
Wow, a lot of infrastructure. Great. And Tracy, how about yourself? Was there something that was very surprising about the experience for you in Hunan?
I think for me, everybody had explained, and I had read a little bit about how insular China is and how they don't get to see a lot of foreigners unless it's in movies, particularly. But the way that I understood it was that I would kind of feel like a minor celebrity, and then everything would die down and it would be okay. So I think for me, the most shocking thing was how much we were stared at, how often people took our photos, how often people videotaped us, how often people, and they would take our photos. The majority of the time they would ask, but sometimes they wouldn't ask. How often you would just be doing the most mundane things like riding a train or riding the bus, and have somebody ask you if they can take a photo or a video with you. We had an experience where when we left Changsha and we got to our little town, we were walking around the little town one evening, and I turned to Matt and I said, "Oh, it's been a few days since anybody asked us to take a photo." And we were like, "Oh yeah." And probably 15 minutes after I said it, this lady walked up and she asked, could she take our photo? And so we said yes. And then a van of her family pulled up next to her, and probably 10 people got out of that van. There was like an older auntie and like a grandma and a grandpa. There were babies, and we had to take like individual photos and group photos. And so it was just really overwhelming for me how conspicuous I was. And I think the thing that I had to overcome was I didn't realize that I don't enjoy being conspicuous. I didn't realize how much I like just kind of, okay, I want to go to the market and it's no big deal. And so I think that was the biggest thing for me. I didn't realize that when you say they don't get to see foreigners, they really do not get to see foreigners, particularly in the rural areas.
Yeah, I can imagine being the star of your life 24 hours a day can be difficult to get used to.
Very difficult.
Well, thank you, Matt and Tracy, for sharing about your times living in China. We're going to continue on and talk a little bit about the application process.
And I'll take that one. And yeah, Tracy and Matt, thank you so much for sharing those stories. It really, like Liz was saying, puts us in the moment. And so before we open it up to a Q&A, because I'm sure we have quite a few more questions for you, I'll cover a few of the logistics relating to the application process and the deadline. So applicants for our year-long programs like China must be native English speakers or native level English speakers and hold a bachelor's degree. And a requirement that is specific to the China program is that you must have the physical degree in your possession by the confirmation date. Like Liz mentioned, there is visa support through our office, so we'll walk you through all those particulars, but that is a specific aspect of the China visa process that you need to pay attention to. You do not have to have any teaching experience. However, a commitment to serving and learning and a flexible attitude are musts, as well as an interest in global affairs and education. There's no local language fluency required. And the required application items are listed here as well as on our website. Just be aware that the process concludes with an interview with our admissions associate about your motivations and interests in teaching in China. We will be accepting applications until May 15th. And definitely feel free to be in constant contact with our admissions staff. They're the ones who will move you through the process. And if you feel a certain thing won't be accomplished by that date, just let us know and we'll work with you to make it happen. And the decision would be made about 2 weeks, if not sooner, after your application has been completed. With regards to the program timeline, the participants will be departing in August and then returning in June of 2019. So now that those logistics are out of the way, we're going to open up to a question and answer session for our panelists. So we're going to take a look at our questions and see if we have any from the audience. And I know that a really popular question that people often run into in these sorts of webinars, and you guys alluded to it, and you seem pretty adventurous when you were in China. So did either of you or both of you have a chance to travel?
Yeah, we didn't travel as much as some of the other volunteers, but we did do quite a bit of travel. We traveled to a few different provinces. We went to Hong Kong. We also did some individual travel without each other. I was able to travel to Wuhan for a few days before Matt joined me. And we traveled to outside of the country. We traveled to Vietnam. And then we would travel to the city occasionally. I think that for me personally, that was one of the things that I felt the most accomplished with, was that with our very limited Chinese, we were able to figure out and learn how to travel around China pretty comfortably. You know, you have things that arise that make you nervous or that you have to learn how to deal with. Particularly because when we would travel, it was usually during a holiday. So, of course, that's when everybody else in the country is traveling. So it's usually pretty crowded. One of the funniest things that I think that happened for me was that when we came back from our first trip after National Week, I asked my students if they traveled anywhere. And they were like, "No, teacher." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Too many Chinese people." And so even like a lot of the local people don't travel just because it's so crowded. But we eventually came to realize that if we didn't travel on our holidays, we would never be able to see the country. But I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is that we figured it out. We figured out how to travel around China with very limited Chinese.
That's wonderful. It's quite an accomplishment. I'm sure that allowed for some overwhelming and funny moments. And then we do have an audience question as well that lends itself to kind of the financial logistics of the program. So did you feel that the monthly stipend allowed for personal expenses and travel, or did you need to bring your own funds with you?
You go, Matt. You
I
handle
go?
the finances. Yes.
Okay, that's good. It's enough. It's if you're frugal, it's enough to live daily and do local travel. If you like to go out a lot, or you want to take 2 weeks and fly to Thailand, then yes, you need supplement. But you can live on the stipend.
Great, thanks, Matt. And just to chime in really quickly, we do recommend that those participating in the program do bring some personal funds in the event of an emergency, or again, if you want to do some larger travel or have any other types of non-frugal living that you want to do, we do recommend that you bring those funds as well.
Thank you, Liz. Perfect. And so far, we don't have any current audience questions that haven't already been answered throughout the course of the webinar. So we'll end with one final question. This one's a little bit broad, so feel free to answer it however feels right to you. But what would you say, Tracy and Matt, what is your favorite memory from your time in China?
Oh my goodness. I have so many. I think my most favorite, well, first I have to say that this was my first real teaching experience. I have volunteered a little bit in Africa, but it was pre-K. And so I just spent a lot of time like singing songs and drawing pictures with them. I didn't really, we just kind of did the alphabet and that type of thing. So this was the first time that I ever really taught. And it took me a long time to not doubt myself and actually feel like I was teaching them something. But just seeing the progress, particularly my lower level students, seeing the progress that they made at the end of the year, and also the way that they warmed up to me. Matt gave me the nickname the Love Bully, because I just kind of would not let them rest. They would be very shy and they would not want to do it. And I just kind of, as sweetly as possible, bullied them into doing a lot of things, like learning to sing particular songs and dance with me. They would say, oh, we're Chinese, we don't sing and dance. They would tell me that all the time. And then by the end of the year, they were singing and dancing. And then I think my favorite moment was they sang me a really, really sweet song that I taught them, but I didn't expect for them to go off on their own and try to learn it on their own. It's the song, I don't think it's called Cups. I think it's called When I'm Gone, but it's in that movie Pitch Perfect. And so I showed them the video and I taught them the song, and then a lot of the students went off on their own and learned the song and then sang it for me on like one of my last days. So that's one of my favorite memories, to go from them telling me that Chinese people don't sing and dance, which is absurd, to actually learning the song and singing it for me. And then I think also just all of the travel experiences that we had, even the ones where we didn't know what we were doing, we always had a good time and learned something new about ourselves and about each other. And just one more thing, I was going to ask Liz, I'm not sure what's on the recommended reading. Is the Quincy Carroll book still on the recommended reading list? I think it's called Up to the Mountains and Down to the Countryside.
Yes, we still have that as the confirmation book. So those that participate in the program do receive that before departing.
That was a very helpful book for me. It's written by a previous WorldTeach volunteer, and I found that book to be very helpful as far as as I read it, because I read it while I was there in China, and so I felt less when I was reading experiences that were so similar to mine. It put me more at ease. So I would definitely suggest that book to help you understand kind of what it's like to be a volunteer and teach English and be a foreigner in China.
Thank you, Tracy. That was a really lovely answer. And Matt, what would you say is one of your favorite memories from your time in China?
I think both teaching. I think one of my favorite ones is I used a lot of music because it's something that they love and they could do well. And I spent a lot of time, we worked with Adele because they loved Adele and I loved Adele, and we spent time learning hello. And then like the last two classes, we worked on it and practiced it in my two big 83, 84 student classes, all singing hello with karaoke like that, and doing so good. It was just gave me chills. It was so beautiful. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Matt. And I just really love that both of your responses have to do with the classroom. I think it speaks to the impact that you had on your classes and, of course, the impact that your students make on you when you're teaching abroad. So thank you both for answering those questions and sharing such lovely sentiments and stories with us. So I do think that Liz and I will now wrap up the webinar. We'd really love to thank all the attendees and, of course, our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much, Tracy and Matt, for joining us today. So for next steps, we would absolutely encourage you to both read alumni reviews on gooverseas.com, and then also please contact our admissions team or anyone associated with WorldTeach to ask to speak to an alum, ask questions about the application process, whatever questions you have, we're happy to answer them. So feel free to email us at admissions@worldteach.org. Just a final reminder, the deadline is May 15th, so we're happy to help you complete your application within that timeline, and we would love to help you through the process. So it's been such a pleasure speaking with you all today. This is a big thank you from Caitlin, and I'll let Liz wrap it up.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us today. Matt and Tracy, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. That's the best way to let people interested in the program really understand what it's like to be on the ground and if the program is the right choice for them. So thank you again for joining us today, and please let us know by emailing admissions@worldteach.org if you do have any questions at all. Have a great day.